Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John's reports for the 21st of September. We've pretty much almost filled back all of the August rally, which was all the way back to here, so we're getting pretty close to it. We've just had this declining shakeout where we had the secondary rejection right here when green was meeting cyan. That was the key pivot point, and as it started to close lower, we still have the rejection. Steel dropped below, that was the confirmation, and then we broke the 50, and once you're below that 50, pretty easy to gauge using those Fibonacci's as we come below, and we just keep getting weakness as we hit it. Now the ranges are still good intraday, so there's still plenty of pops and drops within it, but in general, there's just not enough buying. And this was a product we talked about when there was going to be no second stimulus, so you lost all of that new cash influx for new buyers to come in, and it's profit taking going in there and took place, and it hasn't been extraordinary selling. We can see that by the extremes. We haven't dipped below the red line at all even throughout this, but even with the Power Mode 2, we've had this decline, and every time it's crossed above and then back below again, we've been on declining Power Mode 2 Azure line, and as it does that, it just represents more weakness. So as we see these narrow, we might get a little bit of pop back, but when they come together and then they start to separate, you get an acceleration in the direction that you're headed, and that's exactly what we saw as it took place with the rejection right there at the cyan shorts versus midterm buyers. And then once you do short-term buyers, you get a lot more weakness and breaks through the various support levels. And that's just something we expect to see within a given configuration. NASDAQ, also same situation, a little bit weaker than the ES has been, and that's just because it was an outside performer in general. But same situation there. You have the August. It's actually reached the lows already from the August rally. So that's where we're going to see the beginnings of any turn. Once the NASDAQ bases, then you'll be able to see the S&P respond accordingly. But this is just part and parcel of, a normal, what I would say, correction is part of the election situation, the uncertainty that grows with it. The fact that there was some optimism back here that there was going to be the potential for a deal, and once that became clear that it wasn't going to happen, boom, you lose the incentive, because the Fed really isn't doing anything at this particular point. But everyone gets into a suspension mode the closer you get to the election, which is 50 days out, not even less than that, and you get a paralysis, and this is something that happens every time during election. It's nothing unusual. From a gold standpoint, again, likewise, it's just going to be in a hiatus until something starts to break, and if there's something that's more seminal now, we do have the Supreme Court justice situation. That's probably just going to inflame things more, so we're probably may even see more volatility as rhetoric heats up, and whether or not they're, they were even talking about the potential of using impeachment to prevent Trump from making another selection. This is how insane things have gotten. So who knows where that's going to lead? And that uncertainty throws the market into a little bit of upset, because some people want to be defensive, others see it as an opportunity, and so we get these gyrations that can take place. From a Euro standpoint, no change from the European. Of course, they're having additional cases popping up, what they consider levels that were back at the March, April thing. The problem is there's just this huge disconnect between testing and whether or not you're actually seeing significant amounts of deaths or hospitalizations, and it's just not the case. And so the panic is that they lock things back up again, and all it does is just prevent what Sweden showed was the herd immunity. Sweden is pretty much back to normal. They don't have mask mandates or anything, and they went with an entirely different model that has been the tradition for quite some time, and it proved to be effective. What we are getting closer to is, as we get near the end of the year and are able to look at the stats, you're able to see the difference between total total number of deaths versus any typical year. And when they're not going to be outside normal ranges, it's going to be tough to explain. They're going to try and attribute it to lockdowns and things like that, but that's probably a fallacy of thinking. It's sort of like the idea that you banged your head against the door when you had a cold and the next day you were better, therefore banging your head against the door cures you. The logic just doesn't hold. It's the same logic where people say, oh, well, there's a support line here. I'm like, yeah, but a support line is not buyers. You actually have to see there's interest at a particular level for that level to hold. Yeah, that's what we look for when we reach some of these key areas. We're looking at oil, potential slight retrace back to the 50% line. Well, are we in a situation where you're seeing new buyers? In this case, no. So as we get closer to that 50%, when you don't have a turnaround of those, you might be saying, oh, it's not likely for that to hold. Now, in this case, you have the rising red, which long-term buyers, they tend to hold on to those supports. So that's what we look for. If I have a rollover of red at the same time, cyan's moving over green, no. It's going to break that, and that's the easiest way to tell. So what we started with from the day, and I changed my little line right there so that it's easy to see the day breaks in a deep blue line. And we kind of ebbed higher, and then we started getting the clean DOCs from being in a pretty elevated area, and long short algo is what we see right here, kind of rolled over. That led to a nice breakdown. Then we ended up with the turnaround. Green line right there just represents the dotted green, dotted red. Both of those showed up at the same time there. You had to clear green over cyan and power mode 2 cross all at the same time, along with also a good one too is the cross of the yellow over magenta with the rising shakeout. So that's why it turned green in that particular spot. But if you wanted to wait for a more conservative read, happens over there, rolls over again when the steel crosses below, and you just start to get the turn down from the power mode 2. It doesn't fully confirm a major downtrend until all the way down right here, where then you realize, and we're going to break to another one. That's where we hit that 32.35, broke right through it. Kept trying to test back up to it, but every time it was getting there, you ended up with continued DOC spreads. It started right in here, and then it continued. And some of these you can give it a little bit of a break to see if you're going to get, ongoing support. But what happened was you ended up with just that breakdown of steel, and then you started rolling over on the azure of the power mode 2, and then that led to another series of declines, which really didn't produce anything as you continued to have lower and lower readings until right about over here. That came post turn up, which a little bit earlier, that all happened right there. Same situation, rising shakeouts, the yellow is above magenta here, power mode 2 crosses, green is over cyan, and then it progresses going across there. And then once that one came in, we moved all the way back up to the 100% on steady rising long short algo, as well as you maintain that strong move above for the azure, and get the potential for a little bit of a breakdown when we had this crazy setup on the power mode 2 where the green shoots above. It did produce a brief turn down before it immediately shot back up, but it was in this rising gold area as well as azure and blue, and that usually provides enough strength in those. And that's what we tend to look for, that when you get this kind of rising gold reading, I'm looking for when it plateaus or when they meet. And this is what we talked about, when they meet. That's when you begin to think, okay, is there potential basing, or is it going to start to break down? And then likewise over here when it occurred a little bit further on, and it still held on for quite some time. Even in the DOC spread right here, it was still a reasonable short, along with the power breakdown, that it just kind of held flat, went down to the 61% line at that particular stage, and then you saw the turnaround from a shakeout standpoint. Got a little overbought pretty quick there, and then just before the end, of course, it still was within that broader continuation. It just collapsed right down as we began to open up, and then boom, brought it all the way back up to the highs. So Right now we're been in this progressive DVC spread sell signal that has the shakeout moving into the negative, and it's continuing to go. We now hit the 3285 algo level from before. So again, we've been just trading in these nice algo ranges that we've had preset, and we're not seeing any significant daily support from that standpoint. So this happened just in the last 2 minutes. This 10 plus point decline has been pretty fast. We were starting with a little bit of a pop-up, but not able to sustain itself because we were still within this declining power mode 2 and the shakeout clearly in the negative territory. So again, just because you have the algo line, great. We look for turnaround supports at that particular stage, but you've got to have a corresponding setup that says, hey, there's somebody there who wants to buy the configuration. More likely than not, though, when we do see it, we're going to come right back up to this break point, which would be right around that 32.92 range on a turnaround move. But we're not seeing that setup yet. I was short from, let me look at where I have mine from the other day, and I hadn't done anything but closed out part of it. I'm from the 3361 area, so way up there from earlier, and there was just no reason from a daily standpoint to change that, so just left it as it is, and until that changes, just let it ride. As always, though, I will keep updating charts and presenting any new data that pops up. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.